Just again, Perek Dalet and Perek Hey. Perek Hey and Perek Vav are the Rambam's discussion of Bechira, and we more or less finished it, at least in Pashut Pshat. But let me mention one other very interesting question that the Marsha raises. Can you daven that Hashem should make somebody do Teshuvah? Can I be mispal? I have a parent, a brother, a friend, a spouse, and they're not going in the derech that I feel is the right derech. They're not keeping Shabbos. Can I be mispalel that they do Teshuvah? So what's the problem? So do you remember famous Gemara in Brachos that Rabbi Meir had enemies who were hurting him, and he wanted to be mispalel that Hashem should destroy them. So Broya, who was Rabbi Meir's very, very learned wife, said to Rabbi Meir, "You're making a mistake. You shouldn't pray that Hashem destroys Rishayim. You should pray that they do Teshuvah, and therefore they're no longer Rishayim." And she quoted the pasuk in Tehillim, the end of Borchi Nafshi that we say on Rosh Chodesh, Tehillim Kuf Dalet, Yitamu Chatoim Min Haaretz, which she translates as, "Let sins be removed from the world." Not sinners. Sinners is Chotim. Chatoim means sins. So the prayer was, let sin be destroyed. Or Rishayim Odeinam. Mimela, there are not going to be Rishayim. Okay, for people who might send me letters, I know that the dictative translation of even Chatoim is sinners. The Gemara's drush is very, very difficult. But okay, I got it. But the Gemara does darshan that Chatoim in that pasuk means sins. So do not send me an email criticism on it. But the question is this. So what does Broya say? Do not be mispalel that Rishayim should die. Be mispalel that they should do Teshuvah. So the Marsha asks a very good kasha. How could you be mispalel that somebody does Teshuvah? Chazal say, "Hakol bidei shamayim chutz miyiras shamayim." Everything is controlled by God except the decision to worship Hashem. The decision to worship Hashem, the decision to do mitzvos is not God's decision. It's your decision. If you want to do Teshuvah, you do Teshuvah. If you don't want to do Teshuvah, you won't do Teshuvah. The only thing we learned was at the end of Perek Hey, that if a person is a habitual rasha who sins again and again and again and again, Hashem may remove from him the ability to do Teshuvah, or at least make it much more difficult. That's the meaning of Hashem hardening Paro's heart, which only appears in the last 5 makos, not in the first 5 makos. And the Rambam says that's a getter of an onesh for the habitual offender who constantly disobeys Hashem. And that's a tremendously bad onesh. But Hashem doesn't make a person be righteous, so how is it shayach for Rav Meir to be mispalel that people do Teshuvah? Now, Lamaisa, the Chazon Ish, actually writes that amazingly enough, this is the kayach of tefillah. Tefillah is so powerful that tefillah can even create an interference with bechira. I could pray that you become from. I can pray that you do Teshuvah. Isn't that interfering with bechira? Yeah, that's the kayach of tefillah, right? So the Chazon Ish actually, and the Chazon Ish makes the point that tefillah itself is a volitional act. Tefillah itself is a product of bechira, and since all of us are interconnected, if I am mispalo that you do Teshuvah, the Teshuvah is coming from a bechira, albeit not the bechira of the Baal Teshuvah, but the bechira of the guy davening. But since we're all connected, so essentially there is a linkage between the Teshuvah and the bechira. So we have a very interesting machlokas between the Chazon Ish and the Marsha. If you could be mispalel that Hashem should make somebody do tshuva. Now, even the Marsha's Maida, well, the emphasis of the Gemara is fair. The Marsha actually doesn't answer the Gemara. In other words, if you can't do that, then how is Bruria, what is Bruria saying? The Marsha belabs by Yitzchak. He doesn't answer it. I do want to say, though, that even the Marsha is Maida, and the Rambam himself says it at the end of Perek Vav, that even if I can't be mispalel that somebody else does tshuva, I could be mispalel that Hashem helped me do tshuva. And that's not a stira to Bechira, because we have the famous teaching of Chazal, B'derech sha'adam reitza leilech, ma'lichen I say. Right? Famous Chazal. The derech that you choose to go is the derech that Hashem will lead you on. Hashem is like a very cooperative cab driver. He will take you wherever you want to go. You want to do tshuva, you want to be close to Him, He will give you assistance. So the Marsha says, when the guy himself wants to do tshuva, you could vaday be mispalel that Hashem assist me. But for me to be mispalel over a guy who doesn't want to do tshuva, the Marsha argues that's an interference with his free will, and that's not going to happen. The Chazon Ish, on the other hand, does take the position that this is one of the miraculous kochos of tefillah. I've heard it said, although I don't really know, that one of the great mysteries in life is why some people become frum and some people don't. I mean, you're in college, right? So you're surrounded with Jewish classmates, and some of you become shomer mitzvahs, and some of you do not become shomer mitzvahs, even though more or less you're in the same environment. What exactly happens? So one of the things I once heard was that one person's had a great-great-grandmother who, when she lit candles Friday night, davened to Hashem that her descendants should come back to mitzvahs. And the other one didn't have a great-grandmother who made that tefillah. In other words, this is like the Chazon Ish. This may be a person might become frum because of a tefillah that an ancestor gave to Hashem, that someone they never even met, somebody they're totally not aware of. Right? This is what the Chazon Ish says. Now, in the Yud Gimel Middos, I don't mean the Middos of Rachamim, but in Rabbi Yishmael's 13 Middos, the 13 ways of interpreting the Torah. So it mentions, if you have Shnei Kesuvah Memakchishin Zeh, if you have two verses that contradict each other, so we sometimes look for a Kasuf Hashlishi, we look for a third pasuk that resolves the contradiction. Right? Shnei Kesuvah Memakchishin Zeh, Ad Sheyavai HaKasuf Hashlishi V'Yachriya B'neiim. So I want to suggest that I think in this machlokas between the Chazon Ish and the Marsha, which are really polar opposites, we do have a Kasav Hashlishi, we do have a third Shita that kind of incorporates both ideas at the same time. And this is from Rav Elyashiv, Zechrono Livracha, where Rav Elyashiv says it's a davar pashut, you can't be mispalel if somebody does tshuva. That's their bechira. But you could be mispalel that Hashem puts into their lives the people and the inspiration and the experiences that can influence a person to do tshuva. And that you could be mispalel for, because the emes is, putting aside the great-grandmother's davening, if we ask ourselves what makes one person religious and the other person not religious, a lot of times it'll be that things that one doesn't even understand why they were zocha to it, but they met the right person. They had the right rabbi, the right experience. One person had the experience, the other person didn't have the experience. And even though the ultimate decision to do tshuva is like the Maharsha says, it is your decision. Hashem is not going to make you make that decision. But Hashem can give you certain experiences, or Hashem will not give you certain experiences. So that, Rav Elyashiv says, is 100% where tefillah comes in. I could daven that my brother, my child, my parent should be exposed to positive experiences that can possibly inspire them to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So you can't, according to Rav Elyashiv agrees with the Maharsha here, you cannot directly be mispalel that somebody does tshuva. But you could be mispalel that they should have the experiences that are ma'ir them to do tshuva. Now this could actually be the pshat in the Gemara too. You have to twist the words a little bit. When Breitowitz says to Rav Meir, daven that they do tshuva, so like Rav Elyashiv, you're going to have to interpret it slightly different. Daven that they be exposed to the right people and the right experiences, so b'derech hateva they will come to tshuva. Not that Hashem will make them do tshuva, but Hashem will give them the experiences that will inspire them to do tshuva. And that's a biggie. And really, ultimately, why some people get those experiences, some people not, it's very hard to know. It may be a function of people who daven for them, or whatever it will be. Okay? So that was a final point about Bechira. Yeah?
Is it an appropriate thing to daven that another person's Bechira be affected by my davening in order for me to actualize some aspect of Ruchnius in my ability?
Yeah, I think it is appropriate, even though in a sense you become like almost controlling them. But it's for a good cause, because the concept would be that even if initially, if you go like the Chazon Ish, might feel like made the guy do tshuva, but at some point it'll become his own decision too. At some point it's going to become him, meaning that which he starts by some supernatural force will eventually become his actual teva.
Yeah. But for a person's own personal gain and their own Ruchnius, that's affected by someone else, but to eliminate the obstacle of another person.
Well, what is your motive? Is your motive because you care about the person, or is your motive just because you want to get extra credit for what you accomplished? I mean, I think motives are very important here. This idea of praying that someone should do tshuva, even if we assume it's efficacious, like the Chazon Ish says, you're not doing it for your power, for your ego, for your self-aggrandizement. You're doing it because you care. You care. A parent cares about a child. A parent does not want a child to go off the derech. So when your prayer is a selfless prayer, coming out of your love and your care for that person, so that is when the Chazon Ish says your prayer could even be Mashane Bechira. Now, again, Rav Elyashiv and the Maharsha say even that is not going to be direct. It'll only be in terms of experiences and inspiration. Yeah.
What if it's more similar to what he said with Gashmish? What if you want a person to do Teshuvah so that it benefits you in Gashmish? Maybe they hurt you in some way, or
that they do Teshuvah in terms of...
Maybe they have both motives. Maybe part of it is a selfish. Is that wrong?
Well,
Teshuvah would actually benefit you.
Well, like anything else, I mean, just like every type of tshuva, even if there's inferior tshuva, still does something. Every type of tefillah does something as well. Meaning it's not going to be as powerful, and there's less of a guarantee that you're going to be answered. But it does have a koach. It wouldn't be a puzzle tefillah. It's not sinful. It's not sinful.
Right.
But it's not the optimal, best way a tefillah should be structured. Okay. All right, so this is kind of, I really can't say we finished the subject of Bechira. The subject of Bechira is never finished. It's something that you can spend your whole life on, but at least in terms of Pashat Pshat and the basic teachings of the Rambam, so we've covered Perek Hey and Vav. We now move into Perek Zayin. And Perek Zayin goes back to Teshuvah, meaning Hey and Vav are digressions into Bechira, And now we segue back to Teshuvah because, as we've said many times already, Bechira is the prerequisite to be able to do Teshuvah. Okay, so now we swing back to Teshuvah. And the Rambam basically says that, this may scare people a little bit, that each person must always regard himself that he may die any second. Right, the famous statement, do Teshuvah before you die. And the Talmidim asked their Rebbe, when is that? He says, don't know. Which means the Rambam says a person should always do Teshuvah. Teshuvah is not only Elul stuff, it's not only Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur stuff. One should do Teshuvah. You always try to improve yourself, always try to make up if you hurt people. Ask their mechila. Ask Hashem for forgiveness. There was a famous, excuse me. Today, in America or even in Israel, one of the main jobs of a rabbi is to give sermons, give drushas. But in Europe, that was not the case. If you were a Rav of a community, a Rav did not give drushas. A Rav only spoke twice a year. Some people consider that an improvement. He only spoke Shabbos HaGadol before Pesach and Shabbos Shuvah before Yom Kippur. He did not give a drasha every Shabbos. Of course, the Shabbos HaGadol and the Shabbos Shuvah drashas may be 3 or 4 hours. They were pretty long. And sometimes they were very complicated. In fact, the whole interesting issue that a lot of the Shabbos HaGadol and Shabbos Shuvah drashas that were given historically were very, very lumdush and very, very advanced and very, very high level. So it really was only enjoyed by the great Talmidei Chachamim who could follow it, and the Hamonam were often ignored. So actually there was a taina. In fact, some of the Balei Musar criticized the Shabbos Shuvah, Shabbos HaGadol drashos because they were so involved in intricate pulpulim, even Shabbos Shuvah, intricate pulpulim, that the average person didn't get anything from it. Okay, putting that aside. But even though the Rav did not give a drasha every week, there was a position called Magid, itinerant preachers. These were Magidim, who would go from town to town, and they would be almost the popular entertainment. They would give drashas, they would give musar, they would give chumash shiurim. Now, some of the Magidim were themselves very, very great Talmidei Chachamim in their own right. You've heard, I'm sure, of the Dubner Magid, the Magid of the city of Dubna, who was a very well-known Magid who spoke, simple mashalim and parables. But he was a huge Talmid Chacham, and he was a very good friend of the Vilna Gaon. And the Vilna Gaon insisted that whenever the Dubner Magid was in Vilna, the Dubner Magid come to the Vilna Gaon and give him private musar. Right? So the Dubner Magid had the job of giving the Vilna Gaon musar. And obviously that's kind of scary, if you were told, give the Vilna Gaon musar. So the Dubner Magid, they bring down, well, at least one of the cases, was more than once, he said to the Vilna Gaon, okay, you're such a tzaddik, you're such a Gaon, you're such a Talmid Chacham, but that's because you're isolated from people, you're all by yourself, you're locked up in your room. What do you think you would be if you would go out into the street and have to interact with people? Do you think you would be such a big tzaddik then? And they say the Vilna Gaon started crying, and the Vilna Gaon says, in his humility, I don't know. I don't want to take the chance. That's what he said. Okay. So some were great Gaonim, and some were actually not. It was the way if you were a good speaker, and this was the way you made a parnasa, right? So Magidim were of a different type. But one of the famous Magidim at the end of the 19th century was called the Magid of Kelm. Kelm is a Lithuanian city on the German-Lithuanian border. Kelm. Now, don't confuse the Magid of Kelm with the Alter of Kelm. Two different people. The Alter of Kelm the old man of Kelm, was the Talmud Muvak, the closest Talmud to Rav Yisrael Salanter, the founder of the Musar movement. And the Alter of Kelm created one of the greatest of the Musar yeshivos. Rav Dessler was from Kelm, etc. Rav Yerucham of Mir was from Kelm. Right? So this is the Alter of Kelm. Now, the Magid of Kelm was also a Talmud of Yisrael Salanter, interestingly enough, but he was different. He did not have a yeshiva. but he was a Maggid who would go from place to place to be ma'orer people to Teshuvah. And he was a very, very dramatic speaker, very fiery speaker. And Rabbi Yisrael Salanter would enlist him to go to different communities to be ma'orer people to Teshuvah. Right? So there's the Alter of Kelm who had his yeshiva, and then there's the Maggid of Kelm. So we have a mashal of the Maggid of Kelm. The Maggid of Kelm would come to a city, and he would immediately ask the Rav or ask somebody in the city, what are the problems in this city? What are the issues? What are the areas that need chizuk? Is it Lashon Hara? Is it learning? Is it Shmira Shabbos? Is it Tznius? Is it Bein Adam L'Chaveiro? And he needed to get a sense of what types of things needed to be addressed, and he would incorporate them in his drushes. So the story goes, he once came to a city, a shul, and the courtyard of the shul had a cemetery, meaning the Beis HaKvaros was in the courtyard of the shul. And he started saying, a Maisa happens, that all of the Mesim in that Beis HaKvaros, there was Techiyas HaMesim. They all were given life. And they were allowed to come back for 1/2 an hour to do whatever they can do. Again, I cannot do justice to the drama in which this, I never heard a recording, obviously, but even the written description is extremely dramatic. So I'm going to be much less dramatic than the description. And he says, they have 1/2 an hour to try to be mashlim, whatever they weren't mashlim in this life. So it was frenetic. They went crazy. Somebody ran into the base medrash, pulled out a Gemara to chaperine more learning. Another person went to his wife and children to ask for mechila, to be mesakein, whatever lack of shalom bayis there was. And another person gave tzedakah. Another person went to the soup kitchen to do chesed. And every few seconds they're looking at the clock to see how much time they have left, because this is going to be it. 1/2 an hour and that's it. That's their last chance. Everything they'll be judged upon is based on their life plus this 1/2 an hour, right? So as the clock is winding down, 27 minutes, only 3 minutes left, they get faster and faster and faster and faster, chapping around, chapping around, chapping around, chapping around. And then finally the clock hits the 30-minute mark, and there's a tremendous wail from all of the Mesim that they have to go back. This was their last chance. And then they realized there was so much more they could have done in their lives that they didn't do. And it is recorded that as he's giving this story, it took him 1/2 an hour to describe this. People were sobbing and weeping when they realized the agmas nefesh, the suffering of these people, that there's no longer going to be a chance to do more mitzvahs. Everything in Olam Haba is going to be based on the mitzvahs of your life. And then as they're sobbing and weeping, the Maggid of Kelm then said to the audience, and what's so bad if Hashem gave you more than 1/2 an hour? And then he ended, and who says Hashem gave you 1/2 an hour? We don't know. We don't know. Now, this can make a person depressed, indeed, and that's not the point here. Ivdu es Hashem b'simcha. One has to serve God with joy and optimism and hope. B'ezus Hashem, all of us, all of Klal Yisrael should live in good health. Ad meya v'yesrim shana, and as Rav Moshe Feinstein said, why do you even limit your bracha? Moshe didn't like when you gave somebody your bracha. May you live till 120. Rav Moshe said, why are you limiting brachos? So I always say, Meya v'yesrim ba'od, 120, plus everything else in good health. But still, there is a positive role in remembering the day of death. Because the remembering the fact that we're not going to live forever means we got to try to make every minute count. Every minute is important. And that's what the Rambam says here. Remember the day of death, and therefore spend your life doing tshuva. Because you never know. A person never knows. I've spoken about him already. Rabbi Hauer, Zichron Levach, the head of the OU, died very, very suddenly, Shmini Atzeres night. Totally I mean, sometimes people die. In fact, the Gemara actually said, remember the Gemara says that Yaakov Avinu brought sickness into the world. Now, you might say, is that something to be grateful for? So the Gemara actually says, yeah, because it used to be, before Yaakov Avinu, people would die very suddenly. They would just sneeze, and their neshama would leave the guf. To this day, this is why we say Gesundheit, or God bless you, or Asusa, or La Briut. It's a remnant of a time when sneezing actually was how the neshama left the guf. But that was an awful thing. People died suddenly without warning. They had no time to say goodbye. They had no time to do teshuvah. So Yaakov Avinu was mispalel. He's the first one who got sick. Yaakov Avinu was mispalel that a person should have a certain transition point where they could do teshuvah, they could say goodbye, they could make amends, they could be misaken. Right? So it looks like something very bad as some that are good. Now, on the other hand, it's still the case, as Rabbi Howard, that people do die very, very suddenly. So a person never knows. A person never knows. And therefore, Zechiras Yom HaMaves is one of the ways that we remain in a state of teshuvah. Do teshuvah before you die. Right? And that's what the Rambam emphasizes. Yeah.
Is this also referring to like common cold, or is it only like terminal sickness?
I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, the pashtus of the Chazal, it's referring to people getting illnesses from which they die. It could be that there may have been colds, there may have been other things. You know, in Europe, in certain kehillas, there was actually a minhag. The Chai Adam brings the minhag of Vilna. It's a little scary. That if somebody was sick in bed for 3 days, the Chevra Kadisha would pay a visit. Chevra Kadisha is the burial society, to kind of tell the guy, right, think about teshuvah. Of course, they would emphasize, we're not saying you're going to die, but just in case, something to think about. This was the minhag of the Chevra Kadisha, to be ma'orah people to teshuvah. Okay, so that's point number one, is the idea of Zechiras Yom HaMaves. Then he goes on, and we're just summarizing Perek Zayin. He then makes the point that when we talk about doing teshuvah, we are not just talking about aveiros, or not doing mitzvos. I didn't say Shema, I ate treif, I desecrated Shabbos. But the Rambam says teshuvah also encompasses middos ra'os and striving to have middos tovos. Okay, a person might be totally frum, but he's a cruel person, a rude person, whatever it would be. The Rambam makes the point that just because you correct your mitzvos and aveiros, that does not exhaust the category of teshuvah. There is also teshuvah on middos ra'os, and the Rambam makes the point that teshuvah is even harder than teshuvah on action. Because actions, I can easily, not easily, but actions are more correctable. I didn't do something, now I'll do it. Middos are your feelings, your emotions. That's much more difficult to fix. In fact, it's a well-known memra of Rabbi Saul Salanter that it is easier to learn through Shas than it is to fix one bad midah. To fix one bad midah is enormously difficult. They have in Yerushalayim, other places too, they have something called, maybe you've heard of them, Musar Vadim. A Musar Vadim, a Vad is just an assembly, and this is a group of people who get together. They have for women, they have for men, and it's not just like learning a Musar book, like, you have a Musar Sefer, you learn a Musar book, but this is a practical group. It's almost like a group therapy session devoted to improving a midah, working on a midah. So they may have a text. It may start off, though, it may read a paragraph, very little, from Mesilas Yesharim. But then, it's a very interesting idea. And this is really Rabbi Yisrael Salanter's point. Rabbi Yisrael Salanter's point was not just to learn Sifrei Musar, although that was important. It was to actually discuss strategies for improving your midos, improving your character. So after they may learn Mesilas Yesharim, Chavas Halevavos, Michtav Me'Eliyahu, whatever it is they would learn, they would then discuss hypotheticals based on their own experiences. A person might say, this week somebody pushed me and I got angry at them and I said, idiot, why don't you watch where you're going? And they would discuss, okay, what's the better way of reacting? How do you, it was very practical. And again, I want to emphasize, people say, oh, Rabbi Yisrael Salanter started the Musar movement and now, Baruch Hashem, all the yeshivas do exactly what he said. No, none of the yeshivas do exactly what he said. Learning Sifrei Musar was only a small part of his program. The primary part of his program is unfortunately almost extinct, except for the resurgence of the Musar Vadim. That is, people would get together to discuss how to be Mesakein Midos in practical ways. You may notice, if you ever look at the Alei Shiur from Rav Volba, so it's 2 volumes. Volume 1 is a thinner volume. That's kind of the Musar and Hashkafa of the Torah. Volume 2 is a very fat volume, but if you look at it, it actually is like a script for having vadim. You want to make a vad for chesed, you want to make a vad for anger, and it kind of gives you, it's like almost a guidebook, a workbook. It's step by step by step by step. It's very different than the first chelek. The first chelek is the theoretical underpinnings. The second chelek is a very practical Lamaisa manual, and Rav Wolbe says, if you're not interested in doing the practical work, just look at the first chelek, don't look at the second chelek, and the like. Right, so this was a Musar Vad. Now, Musar Vadim work, you might, from some level, you might say it's almost like, glacially slow. They may spend 5 years working on anger. 5 years. Once a week for 5 years. Let's work on anger. So it's not like, okay, we're going to cover anger this week and Hakaras HaTov next week. It's long-term work. Long-term work. And that's what Rabbi Yisrael Salanter said. Changing a midah is not easy. It is very, very, very hard. And yet the Vilna Gaon writes in his Perush on Mishlei that we were put into the world. Our tachlis in the world is to improve our bad midos and to develop our good midos. Now, it's hard to know exactly what the Vilna Gaon means. The Vilna Gaon is saying that is our tachlis. Our tachlis is not to learn Torah. Our tachlis is not to keep mitzvos. Rather, Torah and mitzvos are there so we will improve our midos. Now that's, number one, amazing. Number two, it's a little hard to understand because how is keeping kosher going to improve my midos? How is wearing tefillin going to improve my midos? We don't see the cause and effect. I understand that there are mitzvahs in the Torah that are directly connected to midos. V'yahavta l'reacha kamocha. So I do that mitzvah, that's going to improve my midos. Tzedakah is going to improve my compassion. Okay, I got that. But the Vilna Gaon seems to be saying all mitzvahs, all Torah. The purpose is so you improve your midos and diminish the midos roast. That's the tachlis of the bria. This is what the Vilna Gaon says. So the Rambam again is making the point here that don't think that you're only doing tshuva on tangible mitzvos and averos. We're doing tshuva on our midos, and this will be especially very, very difficult to do. There is a little sefer that's also available in English called Cheshbon HaNefesh. Have you ever seen Cheshbon HaNefesh? Cheshbon HaNefesh was written in the 19th century by Menachem Mendel Lessing. He's not otherwise well known, but this is a jewel of a sefer. And Rabbi Yisrael Salanter lived after him, but Rabbi Yisrael Salanter loved the Sefer very much and actually had it reprinted at his own. He didn't have money, but he raised the money to print the Sefer Cheshbon HaNefesh. It's a little bit of a controversy because some of what the Cheshbon HaNefesh says parallels Benjamin Franklin's autobiography. But Lamaisa, Rav Lesson even says in the Hakdama that he took even from the Chochmah of Goyim to try to develop character. Ben Franklin has a whole thing. You'll see in a moment the comparison, if any of you remember the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin. And the Cheshbon HaNefesh is about kind of a disciplined way of working on Middos a little bit at a time. He identifies 13 character traits, some positive, some negative, and he gives you a chart. It's the same thing you do with your kids in kindergarten. You know, you write a chart. Make your bed, brush your teeth, you know, whatever it is, and you give them a star for every day that they do it, whatever. So Cheshbon HaNefesh creates a system for character Middos that is kind of that way. You make charts, and you set goals, and every time you achieve the goal, you do this and that, and then you can move on to something else. And it may sound artificial, but the point basically is that habitual behavior becomes part of you. And from the external behaviors, you eventually change inside. And Rabbi Yisrael Salanter endorsed the book very much. Now, as I say, Benjamin Franklin actually says exactly the same thing, and there are comparisons. But again, Rav Lesson says that some of what he wrote he got from the Umos HaOlam as well. In fact, there's a modern book that came out. I didn't read the book. I just saw a review of it. It's called Atomic Habits. It's not a Jewish book. But apparently the thesis of the book is how little habitual behaviors over time can change your personality for the good. Essentially, that's what the Cheshbon HaNefesh says, and that's the sheet of Musar. So it kind of took the Musar and universalized it across the board, which is perfectly fine, because the truth is Musar is a human activity, not just a Jewish activity. I mean, the notion of Middos Tovos is something that even the Umos HaOlam, the Bnei Noach, are supposed to strive to be. So Musar can be very, very universal in that way. And here the Rambam is saying that that's part of the process of Teshuvah, is to be misaken our Middos. Okay, we'll stop here.
Thank you for listening to this Ohr Somayach production. To find out more and to partner in our mission, please visit ohr.edu.